Hey everyone, this is Will, and welcome to this brand new and exciting episode of The Missing Piece. If you follow the news closely, now today, in addition to the geopolitical change, but meanwhile, everyone is also very concerned regarding one of the superpowers in the world, which is China, and the country which is constitute 1.4 billion people. Now, when it comes to China, and too often we tend to think about this political ambition and, of course, this economic agenda. Now, but truth to be told, that today China is facing much greater economic challenges. And again, it's not just for the people who belong to the elites, or we call it the upper class, but also for the younger generations. And some believe that today the younger generations in China are actually making much greater noises, from this political ambition to this economic agenda, and also to some of the major social changes. Now, one article came out recently drew my attention that regarding the younger generations, what's happening to them is that they're facing the issue of loneliness, and take this, that they're willing to spend money that for someone to be accompanied or even to accompany their loneliness. How does that make sense? And how should we understand what is happening today in China to the younger generations? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who's Marrian Zhou. Again, Marrian Zhou, it's a journalist that she writes extensively regarding the news around the world, and particularly regarding the information and also the critical changes in the nation of China. Well, Marrian, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you for inviting me.
Marrian, I want to get started. As I mentioned before, initially when I discovered you, because this amazing article that you wrote, which is entitled, Friends for Hire, Young Chinese Rent Out Their Time to Earn Extra Cash. Now, we understand that China today is facing much greater challenges when it comes to economic and social changes. But in your article that you documented several significant, we'll say the youth that you talked to, and can you help us with better understanding what is happening today to the younger generations? And what is happening exactly regarding that your article mentioned they rent out their time to earn extra cash? Your thoughts?
I think a couple things are happening to millennials, to Gen Z nowadays, especially. I think the first thing is, I'm sure a lot of people have seen the record high youth unemployment that is happening in China that have impacted a lot of fresh grads who basically come out of school and have no job. So that's putting a lot of pressure on young people today. And the massive layoffs that's happening, like people who are working are facing even more stress than before. So I think this all definitely have impacted the younger generation's mental health. And, as young people, they are definitely care more about mental health than previous generations. And, they are actively kind of seeking out ways to vent or, to feel better. So this kind of paid company kind of come in nicely to fit that void. If you pay somebody, a stranger, maybe you don't want to talk to your family or friends about something, but, a stranger is not going to tell anybody you know. So you can just say whatever you feel like, and you can vent, you can complain. And also you don't have to compromise to, let's say your friends want to do something, but you don't want to do, but, you have to do it because that's your friend. So if you pay a stranger, you can prioritize your own desires.
But Marrian, let's go back to the article. Again, I want to read something to you that you wrote, and I wanted your further explanation. This is what you wrote. It's a near perfect marriage of supply and demand. On the supply side, that China's slow economic recovery, layoffs, and record high youth unemployment have created a vast pool of people with time on their hands and the need to earn extra money. On the demand side, enormous workspace and societal pressure have pushed young people to seek new ways to vent and decompress. Again, it's not a secret or it's not a surprise that we see this economic pressure. But meanwhile, that you mentioned that today the younger generations, and particularly that you mentioned this girl, that she was hired by someone, that the person is also married. So the man that does not want to talk to his wife about her issue, and also the man did not want to talk to his friends about his wife's issue, so he hired someone, a total stranger, to vent and to decompress. How should we make of this behavior among the youth or among the millennials? I mean, so in other words, is this really necessary for them to do that? And also, is it really valuable for someone to make money just to listen to someone's vent or listen to someone's complaint? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, if it's really necessary, that's up to that person. We can never really know what's going on in somebody's life. And if they don't feel comfortable talking to their family, then they won't talk to their family. I think an important thing to note is that in China, mental health services, like psychiatrists, therapists, they have them. It's getting more popular, but there's still a stigma about going to somebody or professional help about your own mental health. So I think a lot of people still don't choose that kind of professional services. Most of that services also are still, in the hospital. Like if you go see the doctor, you're going to get diagnosed or it's serious enough that, you will need medicine. So a lot of the people don't feel like they're at that point yet, or they kind of, feel defensive or refuse to go. And it's also expensive. So hiring a stranger, like in this story, becomes something that is in between. It's more casual. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but you can still talk to someone about it and feel better about it.
Marian, I want to ask the question a little bit deeper regarding the word loneliness. I mean, again, traditionally speaking, that for example, I'm the only child in my family. I mean, when I was young, I didn't quite understand the word loneliness because by looking around, all of my friends were also the only one in their family. So we're able to spend time together. And of course, that if you were the only one child in the family, you were naturally considered as the apple of the eyes of the parents or grandparents. But today we're looking in a rather, what we say, a technological advanced society. And we're looking at this, AI aged century. It's hard to fathom that younger generations in China today are facing the issue of loneliness. So again, I know you're not a psychiatrist, I know you're not a psychologist, but from your research and from your investigation, what does that mean? That when we say the younger generations today in China are actually lonely, and of course this is something even mentioned in this article that says everyone is lonely, and even the person who are seeking companionship, or even the person who is helping others, they're also experiencing the issue of loneliness too. But what is loneliness, or how should we understand the loneliness when we live in this fast-paced society? What do you say to that?
I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that, the only child thing. I think when I was growing up, I was only child for quite a while, and then I had siblings, but much younger than me. I was able to play with other kids who lived in the same building, but I feel like that's a different era. I think China has gone through very quick urbanization. You see high rises popping up here and there all the time. And I have heard this from the source that, in the story, being an only child, that you grow up in the high rise, you barely know your neighbors. It's not like back in the village or back in the days that kids in the neighborhood know each other and they grow up together. And you don't have siblings, so is kind of, you're always kind of like on your own, and then you make friends in school. If you're lucky, you're gonna have good friends for a long time. But as you grow up, Chinese society, like a lot of people mentioned before, 内卷, right? Like very competitive. 内卷 is a big thing. So a lot of people, if you work in the same company, you are friends, but you kind of compete against each other. So it's always like a centered around competition, for resources that makes some people kind of feel like, I don't know who to trust. Again, this is what a source told me in the story. Some people definitely feel pressured about being their true selves or showing their true side to somebody. So I think, that also played a part of it. And the third thing is social media. I think this is more of a global phenomenon that, after social media started thriving, are we closer to each other or are we farther from each other? Everybody's on their phone. Everything is fast. Young people spend less time, less efforts trying to make meaningful and deep connections. So I think they all kind of played a part in why young people are feeling lonely these days.
Marrian, I'm very glad you mentioned about social media. I want to ask the question about that. When we look at the citizens on the internet, of course, there's a term it's called netizens. Something that you mentioned in the article, I want to read it to you, that Chinese social media apps such as Douyin and Xiaohongshu have become popular platforms for the services. A lot of netizens started posting their own advertisements out of curiosity, and some have successfully turned into a side hustle. So I really want to talk about this, that when we look at the role of social media, and don't you think that today, because of the presence of social media and because the presence of social media platforms, and those things can actually help the younger generation to depress? I mean, again, we understand those platforms can really help, those services to be published or to be posted. But in a real sense, that you mentioned before, everywhere you go, people are on the phone and they're either texting messages or either they're responding to someone's request or they're looking for something on the social media. Aren't those social media sites are good enough just to help them to relax and help them to unwind? So what is it that something that the social media are missing that only human connections are fulfilling? What are your thoughts on that, Marrian?
I think that's a very philosophical question that can be an entire book. There's no simple or easy answer to it. And I do think it's very much a global phenomenon, not just in China. I do see, on Chinese social media, when they're scrolling, let's say Xiaohongshu or something, you kind of, on social media, people can be anybody, right? They're not necessarily themselves, or they can maybe be a better version or worse version of themselves. So you always kind of see this version of somebody on the internet that they maybe want you to see, and then that's only one facet of them, right? And in person, you talk to somebody, you kind of have much more information from body language, from the vibe. I think you just get like a more rounded understanding of somebody. So I think just by the medium itself, there's a big difference. And people do look for friends a lot on Chinese internet. Like 找搭子, 北京找搭子, 上海找搭子. I'm not sure if you have seen that. It's like literally saying, looking for friends to do things together. I think, young people in China, most young people don't work in their home city. They move around. So a lot of them are, strangers in the new city, especially in cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. There are a lot of kids that are coming from other places. So I think that's something unique in China that kind of prompted this looking for friends on social media thing.
Marian, I want to continue our conversation again. You mentioned in the article what is happening that among the younger generations are actually nationwide. And you mentioned another girl by the last name of Zhang that based in Guangzhou and are currently out of work. And she mentioned that she only accepts female clients for safety reasons and says she wants to be a spiritual teacher in the future. I think that's quite interesting and significant when we look at the concept. So she would like to be a spiritual teacher in the future. And also she mentions that trusting the relationship, it's rather difficult today because younger generations or the millennials are afraid of getting hurt. So I want to know, when you spoke to the person or when you had a conversation with Zhang, what did you get about, what did you make of her answer regarding the goal of being a spiritual teacher? And also that mentioned that younger generations today are afraid of relationship because they're afraid of being hurt. What do you make of all that?
I think, like I mentioned earlier, that 内卷, right? So much competition that actually I heard this from more than one person. That young people, feel there's a competitive nature in relationship these days with, somebody you just met, or especially at work, where you spend most of your time. So it's hard to make meaningful and deep connections if you feel like you're kind of competing with this person. I think what she meant was also, I guess, like a largely felt thing these days. There's a lot of anxiety. Like a lot of, I'm sure you see in China, like a lot of parents constantly call their children and talk to their children about getting married. Like, why don't you have a boyfriend? That's a lot of pressure. Or like, why is your job not better? Or, there's a lot of pressure from family. So, I think family is supposed to be a place where you can relax, right? Where you can recharge. Unfortunately, a lot of young people just don't have that luxury. So I think, they lost a place where they could release their negative energy. They don't want to tell their parents. They don't want to get judged or criticized. And then they maybe don't feel they can trust relatives or maybe some friends to tell their negative part. What if they gossip, right? So I think that's also part of why a lot of young people feel like buying somebody's time to talk to a stranger is much better.
Marian, I got two more questions before letting you go. Now let's talk about another part of this content. You mentioned and you wrote, this trend is catching on with Chinese youth overseas as well. And of course, you mentioned this lady called Cindy Liu, and she's a freelance photographer based in Toronto, has been accepting female customers since last August. How does that make sense? I mean, again, we understand that internally speaking in China, as you mentioned, we have this competition, we have this issue of loneliness, and we have this issue of distrust, the broken relationship, being vulnerable in China, like internally. But it's also happening overseas. Like, so when you spoke to Cindy, when you listened to her story, what did you make of that? Or what did you get out of that? So I guess the question is, why is that also happening overseas? That's something that I don't understand it.
I think loneliness is not unique to China. It's happening. It basically is a modern day problem. Yeah, loneliness is a modern day problem. It's happening a lot, in the Western world, in the US, in Europe. But the thing is, most people have therapists here, and your medical insurance can cover that, and you don't have to go to the hospital to get diagnosed. You can just talk, even if you're not diagnosed as depression. So I think that's a key difference. And people are more open to go to therapy. The stigma has gone down. I think in the future, stigma will also go down in China. But so far, people are still struggling with it. So back to like Chinese students overseas, I think it was interesting that Cindy mentioned a lot of students don't have access to that kind of mental health services, or they don't feel like going. They don't feel like they're there yet. A lot of times, her clients actually ask her to accompany them to go to doctor visits. So that's a little bit different. Like in China, they have a specific industry for hospital companions, like I mentioned. But I think overseas it's quite new. So she's really picking up different gigs here and there. And, I think international students also feel stress in a different way, meaning that fitting in is a stress point if you're an international student. Like it's hard to fit in with American students or the local communities if you're in high school or if you're college students. I definitely gone through that myself in high school. So it could be a lot of stress that they don't have somebody that can understand it. Their parents are not going to understand it. And then, so I think that kind of called for this kind of service as well.
Marian, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question. I mean, again, statistically speaking, that we're looking at the country of China, and also this is happening in the nation of Japan, South Korea, Singapore. Those countries today are facing what we called a population decline, which it's long been considered as a crisis, especially for Japan and for South Korea. And of course, China right now is one of the hot topics as well. And of course, that when we look at the rhetoric and also the messages from the governments in many countries that encourage couples to have more kids. So my question to you, again, based on your reports and based on your investigation, by encouraging the Chinese couples to have more children, how much do you think you could really help with the issue of loneliness for the younger generations? I mean, again, going back to your story and going back to my story, I wish I had a brother and I wish I had a sister when I grew up, but the reality is I did not. But come to think of it, if I had a brother or if I had a sister, I guess I would be less lonely, or I would be less vulnerable when it comes to relationship, because I have someone in my life can help me or even just be friends with me within my family circles. So what do you think? I mean, again, what are your thoughts if we continue to see the push for population increase or for more babies to be born? So I want to hear your final thoughts.
Again, another very complex question, and I appreciate you asking all the important questions. I think they kind of open up to have 3 children, right? But how many people can actually afford it? Like schools are not exactly completely free in China. So, and then the tutoring, and they kind of clamped down the tutoring industry, which kind of made it more expensive. It's affording one child is very difficult. So a lot of people, are not choosing to have a child or to get married. So I think the money thing is the most important factor in this. And another thing is the benefits are not in place for women to feel like they can get married and have children comfortably. I'm sure you've heard about the curse of 35, right? Even if you work for like a huge tech company that's making a lot of money, you could be laid off at 35 because there's so many people in China, the company could just find somebody younger. And then the women are constantly asked, are you going to get married? Are you going to have children during job interviews? There's no law to protect them in that way, especially a workplace. And, so I think the benefits for women are not there. If they can't, I think the Chinese government need to understand, you can't just force somebody to get married. You can't just promote the idea of marriage and people be like, okay, I'll get married. The benefits need to be in place. And then the society need to move forward, in values, for women to feel, okay, I can be equal in a marriage. It's okay for me to get married and my rights and benefits are protected. I think they came up with this 30-day or 20-day, like the cool down period. If you want to get divorced, you have to cool down first before you can get divorced. That's not an encouragement for a lot of people. I see people talking about it on the internet. It's like, I'm not getting married, right? If the guy turns out to be an ass, I have to wait to get divorced. So it just seems kind of like a risky decision for some people. So I think if they really want to encourage, people to tie the knot, then everything else needs to fall in place first.
Well, again, Marrian, it's rather complicated, as you mentioned many times, to understand what's happening today, particularly regarding the younger generations in China. It's understandable that we're facing this economic uncertainty and also this it's more about ambiguity for the millennials today. And of course, at the end of the day, we hope and I pray that things will change. And then again, it's not just about this marriage commitment. It's not about this relationship commitment. It's really about the individual happiness and individual fulfillment. Well, Marrian, thank you so much for your time. And it's been a pleasure. And we'd love to have you back on the show for our future episodes as we continue to pay attention to the younger generations in China. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me.